Hello there. To quote Tucker and Dale versus Evil, Tucker and Dale versus Evil. It has been a doozy of a day. It's late. I just want to curl up in bed and go to sleep. But you haven't had your bedtime story yet. And that means it's time for BS with S.A.C. Don't mind that. That's just my computer throwing up another error. When last we left off, there was a big, huge, bloody fight in Freeport that William wanted no part of, but it happened anyway. And Bloody John lived up to his name, and Marcus did a lot of killing, and Olivander did a lot of killing. And then they left town. Well, Olivander and William did. And that takes us to now on the road to Barrow's End. Chapter 18. The Sword of MacFinn. Having been up all night fighting monsters, overcoming traps, rescuing heroes, overthrowing tyrants, and generally being an all-around nice guy, William had no difficulties persuading Olivander to let him sleep in the bag as they journeyed to Barrow's End. For light, he took with him a sunstick, a thick glass vial about a cubit in length filled with phosphorescent fungi, which glowed a soft blue-green after being left in the sun for any considerable length of time. He nestled into the sleeping bag, which he wrapped tightly around him, and let the gentle rocking of the bag lull him to sleep. It would have worked, too, had the gentle rocking not kept him awake. He tossed and turned, tried to adjust his weight to negate the bag's subtle sway, but nothing helped. It only made him more seasick, only not at sea. Bag sick? Didn't matter. Too much nervousness coursed through his veins, too many thoughts raced through his mind for him to sleep anyway. Home lay no more than a day's journey away, and he still had no plan to deal with the Kobold army. He had Olivander, which was sort of like a plan. Point hero at bad guys, set to kill, celebrate victory over pina coladas. A nagging little voice in his head told him that Olivander would probably expect some form of participation from the boy as well. He had, after all, proven himself a fine and capable adventurer. Granted, Olivander didn't have all the facts. The barkeep still assumed the boy had actually killed the wolves and skeletons himself, rather than set them against each other. He assumed William had defeated a whole ship of pirates single-handed and then blew up the entire boat, rather than simply throwing barrels of gunpowder at them and getting lucky with the explosion. Likewise, William faced comparatively few traps and monsters, most of which had been overcome by the previous group of adventurers. And while he did survive the battle with the guards and the pirates in Freeport, he saw no great accomplishment there. He had 3 of the most powerful warriors he had ever seen at his side. An infant could survive under those conditions. To date, despite several life-or-death encounters with those that would see him dead, he hadn't actually killed anything, nor did he want to kill anything. Unfortunately, Olivander knew none of this, and William's attempts to clarify fell on deaf ears. He could use the sword of MacFinn. He hadn't been chosen to pull it from its granite prison, but why should that matter? Was there some law against breaking the stone around it to free the legendary blade? Not that he had ever heard of. Surely, once he set the sword free, it would resume its former power-granting practices. If nothing else, the sight of such a sword would drive others away in fear. Just mentioning the sword of MacFinn could end wars. Why shouldn't William put that name recognition to use? MacFinn wouldn't object, having been an ordinary guy before finding the blade. Would he? William pulled the dagger from his belt and began to carve away at the rock surrounding the sword. He started his excavation several inches away to be safe. His magic dagger probably wouldn't harm a relic so legendary as the sword of MacFinn, but he saw no reason to take any chances. Bit by bit, pebble by pebble, he whittled the stone away from the blade. As he worked, however, something nagged at him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but some detail bothered him on an imperceptible level. Something wasn't right, he realized, as he sat amid the growing pile of rubble and stone and fragments. This particular granite boulder had an awful lot of other stone types within it. Even acknowledging that granite was a composite rock, it seemed to William that actual granite only accounted for the outermost surface of the boulder, perhaps 3 or 4 inches thick at most. Very strange. He hurried his way inward, afraid to confirm his theory, but too curious to ignore it. His dagger hacked rapidly, sending stones and steel flying until the last of the rock had been carved away from the sword. William stared in disbelief. He couldn't fathom how such a thing could be, couldn't comprehend the sort of craftsmanship it would take to forge such a piece, or why anyone would do it at all. He dug deeper and confirmed his suspicions. The sword of MacFinn was a lie. The metal of the blade blurred seamlessly with a brick of ore perhaps 6 inches below the rock line. He tried to figure out what it meant. Did the sword melt inside the rock? He hefted the large ingot of iron in his hands. The metal slab felt solid throughout. The weight told him that, and contained far more metal than necessary to form the world's missing portion, or the sword's missing portions. Even if he hadn't found so much metal, it still didn't explain why the blade would melt at the center of the boulder. Was that how the prophecy worked? Only the chosen one could pull the blade because it would reform only for him, allowing it to slide from the narrow slit in the rock? Possible. Magic was a funny thing, but it didn't seem likely. William reached the only logical conclusion he could find. The fraudulent sword had been partially smelted from the hunk of ore at its tip. Then, once the blacksmith had forged enough of the sword to convince the adventurers that whatever protruded from the stone was real down to the point, the craftsman formed a stone around the ingot. It wouldn't be too difficult to simulate. Granite was a composite stone after all, but to forge an incomplete blade with such a large piece of metal weighing it down at the end seemed a daunting task. A man would have an easier time. Of course. Sensing his death approaching, MacFinn must have taken the sword to a blacksmith's shop, or, depending on the legend, his own forge. He could have liquefied the metals already in the shop and lowered the blade in, melting its tip and blending it with the other ores, forming an unpullable sword. Then he could have gone to a mason, or his own workshop, depending on the legend, and formed a composite stone around the ingot and sword. After creating such a masterpiece of deception, he needed only to have his disciples place the sword and stone in a remote, dangerous place that would be hard to find and harder still to survive. Whisper a few rumors about a prophecy, and bam! A run-of-the-mill hero becomes an immortal legend. Such a deception would ensure the sword's reputation would only grow over the centuries, and with it, MacFinn's own legend. The harder something seemed to be to obtain, the more potent and valuable others believed it to be. Each hero that failed to pull the sword free added to its power and mystique. It made sense, but that didn't explain the loose ends William still couldn't tie together. For instance, why would MacFinn destroy such a magnificent enchanted weapon in the first place? Jealousy? Was he so vain that he couldn't stomach the thought of another using the blade's power to gain glory that might rival his own? And what sort of effort would it take to melt the sword anyway? Rumor had it that such a weapon were indestructible. For the sword to melt down into a metal brick as it did, the flames would have to have been hot enough to evaporate a man. That or nothing about the sword had ever been magical. Which made sense. Tales of the mountains of unholy madness told of gods and demons who would reveal their secrets to any who dared ask, but no man had ever heard their whispers and kept his mind intact. MacFinn's was the only tale of the mountains that involved any sort of physical artifact. Every single other story involved gaining knowledge man was not meant to know. Even if a man could survive the mind-bending truths to be learned there in the mountain's caverns, the risk of execution for consorting with devils was too great. And yet, MacFinn returned from the mountain a hero to be applauded, not a madman to be burned at the stake. MacFinn went into the mountains, true, but he didn't find a sword there. He found power. He learned at the feet of the gods and kept his sanity whole. He crafted the sword as a ruse, a red herring created to cover his tracks and cause his enemies to underestimate him. With a sword as beautiful as his, commoners and witch hunters would have no difficulty believing it enchanted. He could use his godlike magics at will and attribute it to his blade. Likewise, would-be assassins would strike when they thought him defenseless, like when he slept or took a bath. Because the power lay within him and not the blade, he never needed to fear being caught unarmed. With little effort, he could kill his assailants and summon his sword to him, making sure the blade, one which no other could use, took all the credit. Well played, MacFinn, William said to himself. Well played indeed. William set his knife to whittling the ingot away. He could play MacFinn's game too. Once he had the blade sharpened to a point, he could herald it as the hero's legendary weapon, and he its rightful heir. Supported by the small magics he already had lying about, William felt confident he could pass himself off as the next MacFinn, emulating the sword's powers with a little planning and a little luck. Olivander opened the bag as William put the finishing touches on the blade. William tucked the dagger into its sheath and quickly hid the sword beneath the sleeping bag. He hoped Olivander didn't notice. "What are you doing down there?" Olivander asked. "Me?" William asked, stumbling for an answer. "Is there anyone else down there with you? Another pirate, perhaps?" "No, I mean, nothing, just resting." William tried not to look guilty. He didn't want to imagine how Olivander would react to learning William had stolen a sword not meant for him. He doubted the legendary hero would care that it was literally meant for no one. "Look," Ollie said hesitantly. He seemed genuinely upset. Something had troubled him. "I'm afraid I have some bad news." "What is it?" William asked, holding his fears back as best he could. His voice choked and caught in his throat. "Are we there? Is it even still standing?" "What?" "Oh, I don't know, William, but I'm afraid you'll have to find out on your own." "What?" William nearly jumped out of his skin as he flew to his feet. "Why?" "It's the Raven," he said with a hint of a sob. It's under siege. Seems the Duke of Pembroke didn't take too kindly about me kicking out his lying emissary right before you showed up." Was Olivander crying? William didn't know what to say. He felt useless, helpless. If the situation troubled the mighty Olivander, he didn't stand a chance on his own. "What do we do?" William asked. "I'm going home. You need to continue on. You need to finish this journey alone." "What?" William's chest tightened. His breathing sputtered to a halt. "But I can't. Pain. Lots of pain." "I'm sorry," Olivander apologized. "I truly am, but this is the nature of the job, of any job. Your apprenticeship is over. You're a journeyman now." "But I'm not ready." "You defeated the wolves and the skeletons. You bested the scalawag." "I swear I didn't. I just got lucky." "You triumphed over that dungeon." "It was a shrine." It was all the correction William could give. He had indeed survived, even prospered a little, but that didn't mean that he had what it took to challenge an entire army. He doubted his ability to face them even with Olivander's assistance, and now, to face it alone? The burden was more than he could bear. He leapt to his feet, pleading, "Take me with you, Olivander. We'll come back. I can't do it alone." "Yes, you can. I have faith in you. You're—" Olivander's words fell short. His eyes widened, practically bulging. It was his turn to fall short of breath. "Is that—" "Is what?" William asked, scrunching his forehead. He followed Olivander's gaze to the bottom of the bag and swore to himself. When he leapt to his feet, his foot must have caught at the sleeping bag, exposing the sword. "It's the sword of MacFinn!" No it isn't." "It is!" shouted Oliver. "When Marcus told me he found the sword and the stone in the tomb, shrine, in the shrine, I hoped you would pull it, but..." All 250 pounds of muscle did a jig. The man had surprising grace and poise. He's chosen! I knew it! He's chosen! Actually... Oh, and to think I was worried about leaving you to fight a whole army of kobolds alone," Olivander sang with delight. And not poorly. He could make a living as a troubadour for royalty. Chalk one more skill up to Olivander's impressive resume. "You might still... See, the thing is... But the sword of MacFinn! Those kobolds haven't a chance!" "Look, Olivander, I really need to level with you." "Whatever it is, you can tell me after." "Oh, now I wish I did have to go with you. Oh, to see the sword of MacFinn in action." The man practically turned into a young maid. He was so giddy. Skipping, clapping his hands, William thanked his lucky stars he hadn't left the bag yet. The display bordered on embarrassing. "Look, if you're not going to listen to me, could you at least toss me the rope?" Olivander incorporated an impromptu step into his celebratory dance. William put the sword in his belt, then climbed out of the bag, resting his feet on solid ground for the first time since they left Freeport. Olivander ogled the legendary sword like a child in a pastry shop. William could feel him unsheathing it with his eyes. He felt so dirty being between the sword and the lusty looks Ollie gave it. "Would you like to hold it?" William asked in his most patronizing voice. Ollie nodded like a puppy and clapped as William pulled the blade from his belt. The hero hefted it in his hands and marveled at its fine craftsmanship. He even smelled it, though William had no clue why. The barkeep took a few swings at imaginary enemies. Even the hero
or ever the hero, even in his own mind. I can't believe I'm holding it. Yeah, well, it's okay. Okay. It's the legendary blade of MacFinn. This is a piece of history, a power to rival the gods themselves, and you say it's okay. It's very pretty, William said, so as not to sound ungrateful. Olivander seemed to take insults against the sword personally, as though it were a beloved family member afflicted with a horrifying terminal disease. William considered giving the barkeep a dose of reality, letting him in on its sinister and yet oh so mundane secret, but he couldn't do it. It'd be like telling a toddler that there was no harvest fairy, or that his beloved cow hadn't been taken to a farm further in the country. He couldn't kill the poor man's dreams. He decided to lay it on a little thicker, just to be safe. And it's powerful and special, and I'll never hold its like again. It is, isn't it? He cooed. I can almost feel the energy rippling out of it. I'm sure you can, William said, rolling his eyes. Perhaps he could in his own psychosomatic way. He wondered if he gave the blade to a stranger and told him what it was, if that fellow would go on to perform great deeds of daring and heroism, like a militant placebo. MacFinn's secret was that the blade allowed him to use a power he already possessed within himself. Perhaps others would feel the same. Who knew what a man could achieve when he did not know he could fail? William couldn't decide if he should be glad or depressed that he knew the truth of the sword. So, have you figured out its powers yet? Olivander asked. He rather reminded William of a child discovering birthdays for the first time. Oh, I think I've unraveled its mysteries all right. Can you show me? Olivander stared at William, eyes wide, breath held. What should he do? Reveal the secret and smash the poor man's dreams, then stomp about on them, set fire to the scattered pieces, and urinate on the ashes? He couldn't exactly perform any amazing magical feats, could he? There's a typo there. It just says amazing magical. William took the sword from Olivander and held it aloft, eyeing the sun and the position of the shadows. Probably 9 o'clock in the morning the following day. North was to the left of him, so Barrow's End would be... He brought the sword down sharply, pointing it out ahead of him. There's danger that way. Wrongs that need righting. Really? Olivander asked, amazed. Oh yeah, William said, bluffing. The sword can tell these things. And that seems to be the direction for Barrow's End, so I guess I'll be off. That's south. That's the way we came. Oh, William fumbled for an explanation. Marcus probably needs help establishing order in Freeport. Plus, that's the direction to the World River, which, as you know, leads you back home, where there's trouble. Why didn't it point to Barrow's End? Olivander asked. It's closer. World-ending trouble. Barrow's End is in trouble, yes, but your place is in more trouble. With all those magic items falling into the wrong hands, and so there's math involved. It's a trouble to distance ratio thing. You better go. Well, said Olivander, packing up his things, I suppose you're right. You are MacFinn's heir, after all. He gave William a wink and a playful punch on the shoulder, which hurt a lot. You should, probably leave your gear. My gear? Olivander asked, surprised. Like what? The bags, the mirror, the wineskin, anything I might need to, communicate with you. Yes, to communicate with you. You need the wineskin to communicate? Olivander sounded incredulous. Smoke signals, yeah, in case the mirror breaks and I lose the twin bag. You never know. William crossed his fingers and hoped Olivander bought it. I guess, he said, reluctant. Don't know what I'll do on the way home, though. Long trip without the mirror to talk to my wife. Well, we'll see if we can't get you into that bottomless bag and send that through the twin bag. You'll be home in no time. No need for the mirror when your wife's right there, right? Olivander eyed the opening of the bottomless bag. It was big, no doubt, but perhaps not big enough for him. William, too, wasn't sure the man's broad shoulders would fit. Don't suppose you've learned any escapology on your travels? He asked the adventurer helpfully. Olivander glared a little, then set to work squeezing himself into the bag. It looked painful, at times downright impossible, but after a series of joint dislocations and bitter glances, he managed to fit his body inside. Cozy? William asked without waiting for a response. He tossed the enchanted sack into the twin bag, watching it disappear as it fell out the other side. He waited for the bag to come back, which it did several minutes later, rim-coated in butter. "Whatever works," he said as he shrugged, packed his belongings into the bag, and slipped it once more onto his back. He turned north and followed the road toward Barrow's End, toward a home which might not be there to wait for him. "Well," he said, adjusting his bag as he walked, "time to get about the business of not dying." And that's where we are going to end for tonight. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. We'll see what happens next time. Is Barrow's End still there? Will he be able to save it if it is? What will he do if it's not? We'll see. Until then, we'll see you later.